Eliot Ness, the man who brought down Al Capone, is as famous as any detective in modern American history. Immortalized in film and television, he is rightly revered for his genuinely impressive success in the field of crime fighting. But just like in the old saying that all political careers end in failure, Ness's legendary time in law enforcement would end without a crowning glory. His last major case pitted his wits against those of one of the most grisly serial killers of all time, a psychopath who became known as the Cleveland torso murderer. The killer's 12 known victims were murdered between 1935 and 1938, although some estimates claim that the final tally could be as high as 20. Of the 12, only 3 were ever positively identified. Unusually for a serial killer, both men and women were killed. Depression-era America was filled with drifters and indigents, and they were an easy target for exploitation or murder. In Cleveland, huge shantytowns sprang up, populated not only by the down and out, but by so-called working poor, whose employment income was so inadequate that they were forced into slums alongside the penniless. The shantytown, known as Cleveland Flats, was the killer's hunting ground. One area in particular, known as Kingsbury Run, was at the epicenter of the murders. This gave rise to the killer's nickname, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Victims were gratuitously dismembered and often found long after death. These factors made an already challenging case seem close to hopeless. To begin with, Ness had only a peripheral involvement in the matter. He occupied the role of Director of Public Safety with responsibility for the police, but did no day-to-day investigation. As law enforcement reached an impasse in the inquiry, pressure grew for him to take a more hands-on role. Ness himself was aiming for a political career and needed little encouragement to insert himself into the manhunt. There's lots more to come in this video, but please consider subscribing. Thank you. And initially, he did add something to the investigation. He developed a suspect, Dr. Francis Sweeney, who had initially been discounted by the police. In what would now be known as criminal profiling, Ness saw in Sweeney all the ingredients required. A violent drunk with mental problems, Sweeney had also been a military surgeon during World War I, specializing in amputations. Body parts had been found near a soldier's home that Sweeney frequented. Ness also believed that Sweeney had been prematurely excluded because he came from a prominent family, and his cousin was a congressman who had frequently criticized Ness for his failure to make an arrest in the case. The doctor was brought in and thoroughly interrogated, a process which included 2 of the first ever polygraph tests. All who took part in the interviews were convinced of Sweeney's guilt, but without a confession, Sweeney walked. A frustrated and impatient Ness then made a rare error that would not only end his investigation, but damage him for the remainder of his life. He ordered that the shantytowns be evacuated and burned, a misguided attempt to stop the killings. The population of Cleveland interpreted this as a callous act, depriving already destitute people of their only shelter. Ironically, after his pressuring of Sweeney, the doctor checked himself into a mental hospital and the killing stopped. It seemed that perhaps Ness had been right all along. For years afterwards, Sweeney sent taunting and threatening letters and postcards to Ness and his family until his death in an institution in 1964. Ness never wavered that he had found the killer. Others believed that the killer simply moved on from Cleveland and killed again elsewhere in the U.S. The reputation and life of Eliot Ness went into a downward spiral after the unsuccessful hunt for the torso murderer. Already a heavy drinker, his consumption slid out of control, and included a drunk driving accident which he was accused of attempting to cover up. Despite his reduced standing, he decided to run an ultimately disastrous campaign for mayor of Cleveland. From there, he faded into obscurity, and the man who had ridden high as the leader of the Untouchables in Prohibition-era Chicago was reduced to working as a bookstore clerk, among many other odd jobs. Although he was flawed, he remained honest in a time where dishonesty paid. Later generations would celebrate his remarkable career, but in 1957, Eliot Ness died of a massive heart attack, penniless and almost forgotten.